Hello and welcome to Consciousness Central, coming to you from Toward a Science of Consciousness Conference 2015 at the University of Helsinki here in beautiful Finland. Join me, Nick Day, for the next 4 days of programming with debate, interviews, analysis and much, much more. Welcome. So I'd like to welcome our first guest to Consciousness Central 2015. This is Paavo Pelkkanen. He is the chair and the organizer of Toward a Science of Consciousness 2015 here in Helsinki, University of Helsinki in Finland. Paavo, welcome. Paavo is also a philosopher of mind.
Right.
And so perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about what was your vision for this year's conference and where are we going with it?
Okay, so some of the theme, I think one of the themes is this idea of structuralism, which is it comes from the question like what do the natural sciences, especially physics, tell us about reality? And one answer that has been quite prominent in recent years is that structure is more fundamental than things. And this could be like in fundamental physics, it might have to do with invariances or various kinds of relationships that stay the same while everything else seems to be more variable. And so the question arises, well, if structure is a fundamental feature of the universe, then what about consciousness? Because consciousness seems to have also some non-structural, more intrinsic, perhaps non-relational aspects to it. So this is one of the questions which may be a little bit new here in this conference, and so we have James Ladyman, Philip Goff, and Bill Seeger addressing that issue. So that would be an example of a new theme. And there are like the first session will be on body representation, collective emotions, two-person neuroscience. There are these kinds of new themes from neuroscience phenomenology. And I guess a constant theme in the TSC conference, like a leitmotif, are the quantum approaches. And this was there, of course, with Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose back in '94 when it all began. And we have a pretty strong quantum leitmotif here. We had a pre-conference talk by Basil Hiley with the Bohm approach yesterday. And we have a couple of sessions on the theme, and also David Chalmers' keynote will be on consciousness collapse in the quantum wave functions.
So for somebody who's perhaps just coming to consciousness, relatively recently, what's the best way to understand the relationship between quantum physics and consciousness? Because for some people they might say, well, this is physics on the one side. How on earth can that possibly apply? How would you?
So in other words, the question is something like, what are the ways in which quantum theory can be applied at all when you're interested in consciousness? I would say there are essentially three ways in which this can be done. The first way is what Stuart, Roger Penrose, Henry Stapp, Giuseppe Vinciello and others do, which is to take quantum physics as it is, as a physical discipline, and try to apply it to brain activity, to brain structures and brain activity. And then, of course, the question that remains open is how brain activity is correlated with conscious activity. It's essentially an open question when you go that way. Another way is, and that's what I was alluding to before, you can try and look at quantum theory, strip away all the physics from it, just keep the mathematical apparatus and use that to apply cognitive and mental processes directly without the detour over the brain. And I mean, we might be able to talk about this in more detail about certain examples in which this has turned out fruitful. And that, before you keep asking, there's one third way, and that's a little more abstract, I think, approach, which plays a role in dual aspect monism. And the work that Basil Hiley presented yesterday, that fits exactly into that domain.
One of the big problems in the science of consciousness is we're trying to find a scientific way to describe something that is entirely subjective. And obviously most physicists are
It's
dealing
not
with...
entirely subjective, and
well, please elaborate on that.
I've opened myself open.
This is
here.
good. We want to...
No, because you see, in the type of thing that I was trying to do with David Bohm, getting this notion of active information. Now, normally information is thought to be something which is subjective. You give me some information and then I do whatever I want to do with it from my own perspective, and I either take some notice of it or I do nothing at all. But what we were finding in the microscopic world, that we could not explain the behavior by means of the simple, let me say, the efficient cause. I'm going back to Aristotle, pushing and pulling. But rather we needed something subtle, which is for the formative cause. And the form, if you think of the word information, David Bohm was very good at that, looking at the etymological origins of the word. And inform comes from forming forming from within. So what he thought was that, well, maybe these, at the fundamental level, these particles were actually using this extended idea of information from within. And therefore, what we think is subjective may not be subjective if nature is actually using some subtle notion like that.
So let's go and join Cameron Keyes at today's poster session.
Enjoying the poster session?
Oh, lovely.
Excellent. And well, we're going to go check out a 7-year-old girl who has a poster here at TSC 2015.
Hang on.
Extraordinary.
I follow you.
Let's try it.
Yeah, try it.
So tell us what your name is and guide us through your poster for a little bit.
My name is Mukti Sahni. Paul Brunton had come to search secret India. He described Sir Sahabji Maharaj in the following words: master of over 100,000 people who practice a mysterious form of yoga, prime organizer of the multifarious and materialistic activities which seethe around me in Diyarbakr. Taken all in all, I write him down as a brilliant and breathtaking man. Nowhere in India, nowhere in the entire world may I expect to meet his like again. These poems are describing Diyarbakr and Diyarbakr life. This is DI distance education in India. This is Diyarbakr solar map. Increased levels of consciousness can be measured through MEC facility at Nano Center DEI.
You're here talking about out-of-body experiences. What have you had to say this time about that?
Well, I'm kind of going to tell my life story in a way.
Excellent.
At least my intellectual life, well, and my spiritual life, I suppose. Because I had this extraordinary experience, 1970, how long is that? 45 years ago.
45 years.
And that's what drove me into parapsychology. Parapsychology threw me out. I mean, I couldn't find any phenomena. That's what drove me into consciousness, really, was thinking, well, how can I understand this bizarre experience? And then for decades, I didn't do anything to do with out-of-body experiences. But amazingly, in the last, not much more than 10 years, there really is a science of out-of-body experiences. And so I've kind of gone really enthusiastically back into it, because I think we can now understand what's going on. And that's really exciting.
So, the next question would be, what's really going on?
What's really going on? Well, it's all to do with the nature of self. I mean, the first really exciting discovery was totally accidental by the neurosurgeon Olaf Blanke in Zurich, who discovered, because he had a whole battery of electrodes on an epileptic patient's head, that he could stimulate a particular spot in the right temporoparietal junction and produce an out-of-the-body experience. Wow. There were hints of that before. Penfield had found something similar, but with very crude electrodes, and he couldn't repeat it, whereas this was repeatable. And at a lower current, the woman reported strange bodily distortions, stretching, and to me that's really interesting, because I went in Persinger's helmet thing, where he puts fluctuating magnetic fields, and I got exactly that, legs going out, and really strange body distortions. So it turns out that this area is where information comes together from all the senses and from inside the body to construct a body schema. So that already begins to tell you, oh, well, maybe it's just upsetting the body schema. The body schema is a kind of model that our brain builds in order for us to, well, I can only move my hands like this and clap and poke you because there's a schema there and it's very rapidly updated and very accurate. Well, that's not all there is to self. Now, playing around with various illusions, people have discovered that you can separate out different aspects of the self. So in terms of your body schema, you've got, it's my body, I own it, it's ownership. There's where I feel myself to be. There's where I seem to be looking from. And there's where the agent is, what, to control things. Turns out with these clever virtual reality experiments, you can separate out all those things. And the outer body experience is when you have taken agency, first person perspective and left ownership down there. That's my body, but I'm up here. And it begins to fall into place that way.
I've been collaborating with Dr. Hammeroff for about 2 years at the University of Arizona. And I was doing a study in the hospital where they're implanting electrodes in the brain. Dr. Hammeroff is an anesthesiologist. So my team ran into Dr. Hammeroff by chance in the hospital. He came to us all excited and he said, I have this device. And we said, we're tired, we want to go home, because we've been in the OR for about 8 hours at that point. And Dr. Hammeroff said, no, you just put an ultrasound up to your head and you can make people feel better. And my lab is a psychophysiology lab. We're very interested in depression, mood disorders, things like that. So even though we were tired, we were intrigued, and we said, okay, tell us what you're talking about. And through that collaboration, we started doing studies with Dr. Hammeroff. So since then, we've run about 300 subjects at the University of Arizona. These are all healthy undergraduates, so they're not depressed, they're not on any medications or anything like that. And what we've done is we've targeted a part of the brain, so left and right frontal cortex, parts of the brain that are involved in mood, and the idea was to try to make people feel better. So that's what we found through several studies. They're double-blinded studies. Essentially, we just put this little device up to their head, and we can change the way they feel for about an hour. In the brain, what we think is going on is that the ultrasound, it's just a pressure wave that we're putting in the head, and that pressure wave is actually acting on the cells in some way. So classically, it's either acting on the cells in a way that gets them to fire. Dr. Hammeroff actually thinks that it's acting on the microtubules inside of the cells. So of course he has a theory about microtubules and consciousness. And so we're influencing mood either through one of these mechanisms. And then what we're doing is we're targeting parts of the brain that we think are involved in mood. And that comes from our studies on depression and healthy people as well.
Can I try this?
Sure.
See how it goes? Yes, okay, so what do I do?
Okay, so we're going to take the transducer.
All
We're going to put a coupling gel, which is just suspended water. It's 90% water. And put a little bit on there. And I think today for you, we're going to do your third eye, right in the center of your forehead.
The third eye, right. I need some of that after a week of consciousness.
And it's going to be like a squeegee for your third eye.
A squeegee for my third eye.
Yes.
That's exactly what I need.
Clearing.
All right.
So we'll take this. You're going to hear a clicking noise. That's the carrier frequency. Take this and put this on the front of your head for 30 seconds.
All right.
So I'm going to have you hold it.
So I just do this. There we go. And I can hear a very faint clicking, ticking, and I just hold it like this.
Exactly. You may feel a slight pressure at first in your head, and then it may relax into a sense of clarity, a lightheadedness, maybe just a feeling of being one with the world.
My third eye feels very wide open, and wow, everything looks amazing. Does consciousness drive evolution, or is it an epiphenomenon of evolution? So Deepak, perhaps you want to kick off with this. You've got thoughts on that.
Well, if qualia or subjective experiences are literally the experiences of consciousness, and if all biological forms, from amoeba to paramecium to even bacteria, have a primitive form of qualia experience, pleasure, pain. As Stuart says, a paramecium can reproduce, it can mate, it looks for food, it avoids toxins, so it has some kind of awareness and doesn't have a brain. But you go even deeper into the subatomic particles, they have charges, positive and negative, so they respond to each other. In fact, a subatomic particle is nothing other than the confluence of all the relationships of all the other particles. So why does it attract one particle repel another, perhaps there's some degree of subjective experience. So if that's so, and Stuart can elaborate on this, then it is qualia that are triggering behavior, and origin of species is actually origin of species of consciousness. You're a Homo sapiens species of consciousness. A bat is another species of consciousness. Of course, they have different experiences, qualia experiences, presumably. A bat moves through the echo of ultrasound or whatever, but that's its subjective experience. So what I'm saying is subjective experience drives evolution, not just pure mechanical random mutations. And now there's a lot of research on how epigenetics influences not the mutation, but actually epigenetics even influences memory in subsequent generations in animals, is passed on epigenetically. You shock some mice, you have them smell wintergreen or something, and the next generation of mice will be afraid of the smell. Or if you look at cows that are in an enclosure where there are electrical fences and they get zapped, the next generation cow will not go to near the wire. How is that information transferred? In consciousness, which is non-local, which is localizing as species of consciousness. Random mutations are probabilistic mutations. They follow a distribution curve. And of course, natural selection still holds true, but natural selection of what? I would say of experience.
Right, Stuart.
I think epigenetics is becoming increasingly important, and it looks like the information, learned behaviors like the electrical fence and so forth, are transferred through the centrosomes. There's some beautiful work recently showing how much information is encoded in the centrosomes outside the nucleus, outside the genes, which replicate and pass this information on to their daughter cells. So you don't need to go to the genes. This information from learned behaviors from a parent can be transferred to their offspring, and on and on and on. But the whole thing about evolution, you know, Darwin's theory is wonderful and it's a pillar of science, but it's not complete. For one thing, it doesn't account for the origin of life, why life started in the first place. And you know, natural selection and by random mutations, incremental changes, it sort of works, but I'm not sure it does. I've been looking at this carefully lately, and I'm writing something about it called the quantum pleasure principle. The idea is that if Roger Penrose is right and objective reductions occur ubiquitously throughout the world, throughout the universe, even at the submicroscopic level, giving rise to proto-conscious events, some of them are going to have favorable qualia. They're going to feel good. And I think life evolved, or life originated in the primordial soup billions and billions of years ago in non-polar amphipathic molecules, they're called, like dopamine. Dopamine, the pleasure molecule in the brain, is actually very similar to the molecules that formed in the primordial soup. They coalesce, oil avoiding water. They have an oil end and a polar end. The oil ends get together and support quantum effects, which give rise to Penrose objective reduction and qualia. Now, some of those qualia are going to feel good. There's going to be feedback. The feedback fitness function is going to act to cause them to arrange themselves in such a way that optimizes feeling, optimizes qualia. So I think life originated and then evolved to feel good. And mutations may certainly played a role, but I think a main driving force in evolution was feeling. Now, one example is sex. You know, Dawkins and other evolutionary biologists find no reason for sex. They say, why would you throw away half your genes? And it's kind of a mystery to evolutionary biology. Well, it's no mystery to me. Sex feels good. And I think animals, their purposeful behavior, which does serve their genes, but it also serves their own pleasure, and it's not just feeling good in the sense of a hedonistic sense, but I think feeling good in terms of altruism. It's better to give than to receive, spiritual enlightenment, delaying your gratification so you can be more successful in life and happier on the big picture. So I think feelings played and are playing a key role in evolution.
Here at the International Conference Toward the Science of Consciousness 2015 in Helsinki, two giants in the fields of neuroscience are present. One from America, Professor Walter Freeman, and one from Europe, Professor Jean-Pierre Chancheux.
I'm very pleased to contribute to this meeting, and I'm honored to be with you. And the view I presented is based on my experience as a neuroscientist, and the idea that we have to understand the highest of the brain function, which is access to consciousness, as neuroscientists, and on the basis of the building blocks of the brain, which are the neurons and the glial cells, the synapses, which interconnect the neurons, and the organization of these neurons in highly complex networks. So my view is that all these processes from the molecular biology up to consciousness are nested within each other, and that the molecular level is imposing constraints to the higher brain functions.
My entry into this field was through internal medicine and clinical neurology. And therefore, early on, I was concerned with the mechanisms of a variety of disease processes that afflict the central nervous system. And this is quite remarkable in the sense that for all its complexity, brains are remarkably immune to disorders on the whole. So that there is much to learn about how the brains defend themselves against the vicissitudes of 80, 90 years of living. Now, the point that you make is, I think, well taken, that brains are slowed not so much by the time required for allosteric changes, which can be in the microsecond range.
Micromillisecond, yes, sir.
But the kinds of change that we observe are measured in, at best, milliseconds, and sometimes fractions of a second, which is, I think, reasonable. Now, this must be tempered by the recognition of the remark of John von Neumann in his 1958 book, The Computer and the Brain, in which he basically stated that he had been seeking throughout his 58 years of life for the language of the brain, and realized...
The short code, he says that.
Yes.
Yeah.
But realized that he had not found it.
No, I don't know if it exists.
Well, that was his point, is that whatever the brain code was, it was not mathematics and not language or natural language, but one thing was clear to him, that brains could do in very few short steps what computers required millions of steps in extraordinary arithmetic depth. And therefore, one should seek the nature of these short steps.